Hi guys, and welcome back to another lesson in Algebra 1. Today's lesson is Unit 4, Lesson 6. We're going to be looking at x and y intercepts. And so we can find x and y intercepts in three different formats. We can be given a graph, we can be given a data table, or we could be given a linear equation. And we should be able to find the x and y intercepts in all those cases. And then if we know those x and y intercepts, we can actually graph the equation using the x and y intercept. So there's two parts to today's lesson. So to help understand what an x-intercept is, let's just kind of step back in time and let's talk about our y-intercept. So y'all know about y-intercept. You know, that's going to be where it crosses the y-axis. So your y-intercept is the point where the line crosses the y-axis. Okay, so if we look over here, this point right here, this is my y-intercept. Okay, and we can even write this point. This point is going to be 0, 5. Okay, that's my y-intercept is 0, 5, that point. So notice there's something interesting here. We have 0 as my x value. Okay, so it turns out that all y-intercepts will have x equals 0. Okay, so x equals 0 at the y-intercept. And this means when we solve equations, we're going to do this. When we solve equations for this, we are going to plug in 0 for x. Okay, and it makes sense because we look up here and my x value is 0 at the y-intercept. This is true for all y-intercepts. So every single y-intercept in the history of time, we can assume that it's going to be 0 is x. Okay, so that's kind of a handy little assumption to make. Let's flip over to the x-intercept. So if a y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis, the x-intercept is the point where it crosses the x-axis. Okay, so we can have a point down here. So this is going to be my x-intercept. Okay, so like this point, if we wrote this out, is going to be 3, 0. That's what that point is. And so notice what is 0 this time. The 0 is the y value. Okay, so that's important to know. So y is going to equal 0 at the x-intercept. And so, you know, when we solve equations, you know, when we're going to do something with equations, we are going to plug in 0 for y. Okay, and it's easy to see why that is, because if my x-intercept has a value of y, it doesn't matter where it is on the x-intercept. All x-intercepts are going to have a 0 for y, all of them, infinity number. Okay, so that's going to be our little tip for solving these equations. Okay, so let's look at this first guy here. So this first example, we have, it says find the x and y intercepts, and we're given this equation. I'm going to break this up into two chunks. So here I'm going to put my x-intercept, and let me remind myself, when I'm finding my x-intercept, this is going to be when y equals 0. Okay, we just proved it up here. My x-intercept is right here. And so my y is 0 in that case. So we're going to plug 0 in for y. Okay, is how we'll solve it. So I'm going to write my equation over again. So I'm going to take this 0 and I'm going to plug it in for y. Okay, so I get 0 equals 2x minus 4. I can pick either the x or the 4 to move over. It doesn't matter which. The easiest thing to me is just to move the 4 over. But, you know, you might solve it a little bit differently. You could have moved the x over. This cancels, and so we get 4 equals 2x. To get rid of that coefficient in front of the x, we're going to divide by 2, divide by 2, and so we get 2 equals x. So my x-intercept is going to be equal to 2. We're going to do the same process, but we're going to reverse it. Okay, we're going to do it for a y-intercept. So let me just write out the rationalization. Okay, my y-intercept we're going to find on this side. Okay, what is true about a y-intercept? This is going to be when x equals 0. Okay, we can look up here and we can prove it to ourselves. So my y-intercept, this is when my x equals 0. All y-intercepts have an x of 0. Okay, we can see it here. So we're going to plug that 0 in for y. So let's go ahead and write this out. Okay, so I'm going to write my equation over again. I got y equals 2x minus 4. But we just said my x equals 0, so I'm going to plug that in here for that x. So I get y equals 2 times 0 minus 4, and it's one of our most favorite things. This is just going to cancel out, and we get y equals negative 4. So my y-intercept is negative 4. So notice that it's always like an xy pair, right? If you're finding your x-intercept, when you're finding your x-intercept, the y is 0. And when you're finding the y-intercept, the x is 0. So it's kind of easy to keep it straight in your head. If you're finding your x-intercept, your y is going to be 0. If you're finding your y-intercept, the x is 0. So it's like whatever the opposite is of what they're asking. Alrighty, let's look at it in this data table. So if we want to find my x-intercept, its partner, you know, for the x-intercept is going to be when y equals 0. Well, let's look at this data table and let's see what we've got going on here. So we want to find y is 0. Well, I see a 0 right here. Alrighty, we can handle that. So I just look across here and I see my x is negative 2. So my x-intercept is negative 2. We could do that the other way. We're going to find our y-intercept. And remember, you know, it's like xy pair, right? So if we're looking for my y-intercept, the thing that's going to be 0 is x. So I'm just going to write that down when x equals 0. Okay, and I really do recommend that when y'all are solving this, take the time that it takes to write stuff down and puzzle through it, to like to write down your train of thought, because it helps math become clearer with time when you're constantly writing it down and showing everything and reading over what you write. So we can look over here on this x side and we can find when x is 0. So when x is 0, the y-intercept is 4. Okay, so that's pretty easy. Let's go look at this one down here. Now, if I am going too fast, just pause it, because of course I do get on a roll when I am recording. So let's see, let's read this next one. So it says we want to find the x and y intercept, and then we're going to graph the line using the intercepts, and they gave us this guy here. All right, so our first part is we're going to find the intercepts, right? That's our first part. And then our second part is we're going to graph. So let's deal with this first part first. Okay, so we have the x-intercept. Remember, this is when y equals 0. Okay, so I write my equation over again. X plus y equals 5. I am going to take that 0 and I'm going to plug it in for y. Okay, so I get x plus 0 equals 5. That 0 cancels out, and so we are left with x equals 5. So my x-intercept is 5. All righty. Now this one's going to be kind of a little interesting situation, and you'll see what I mean because we're going to go find this y-intercept. So remember, when we're looking for our y-intercept is when x equals 0. And when I write my equation, I got x plus y equals 5. So when my x is 0, I'm going to plug that in for x. And so you get 0 plus y equals 5. So you know that 0 drops out, and we get this kind of interesting situation where my x and y intercepts are the same value. That's okay. That's totally okay. It is no big deal at all. Okay, my y-intercept, that's going to be where my y is a positive 5. So it's a positive 5 right here. And my x-intercept is where my x is a positive 5, which is right here. Okay, and then all we have to do is draw our line now. And I totally messed that up as usual. Let's see if we can draw it again a little bit better. Oh yeah, that was way better. I did a better job that next time. Here, let's try to, yeah, there we go. Okay, so there is my line. Put some little arrows on the end. It goes to infinity. Okay, let's look at the next one. So that was a pretty simple one, but you know, we can go and add coefficients here. All right, so we're going to find our x and y intercepts, and then we're going to graph using our line. So just make sure we realize that we know that this is two different problems, right? So we're going to find the x and y intercepts, and then we're going to graph using the x and y intercepts. So step 1, we're going to find intercepts. And then part 2, we're going to graph. Okay, so we're making sure that we're doing all the parts of the problem. Okay, so we're going to find our x-intercept first. You could have started with y-intercept. I could have started with x, I guess because it comes first in the alphabet out of x and y. So remember, our x-intercept is when y equals 0. So if I take my equation, 4x minus 2y equals 8, and I see that I have my y is 0, I'm going to plug in 0 right here for y. So when I rewrite that, I get 4x minus 2 times 0 equals 8. And my favorite thing in the world happens. We get this to drop out because anything times 0, you know, it drops out. So we get 4x equals 8. We can divide by 4 on both sides. And so we're going to get x equals 2. So my x-intercept is 2. Let's solve it when we're finding our y-intercept. So we're going to switch gears real fast. Draw a line here. We've got a y-intercept. Remember, a y-intercept is when x equals 0. So we write our equation, 4x minus 2y equals 8. And my x is 0, so I'm going to plug a 0 in here for x. Okay. 4 times 0 minus 2y equals 8. My favorite thing in the world happens. Boom, that cancels out. So we get negative 2y equals 8. We can divide by negative 2, divide by negative 2. That cancels, and we get y equals negative 4. Okay, that's going to be my y-intercept. Okay, we can put negative 4 down here. Alrighty, so We go and place our dots so that we can graph, because that is the second part, right? It told us to graph. So we cannot forget that. And then plus, of course, it's got this big old graph here for a reason. So let's see, we're going to go to where y-intercept is -4. So we're going to go down to -1, 2, 3, 4 right here. The x-intercept is +2. And so we can draw our line. Yeah, that was awesome. Okay. Draw again. Okay, that was marginally better, or actually a lot better. Okay, so there's our line. As best as I could do, drawing freehand on the computer. Alrighty, my friends, that is the end of the notes for this session. I hope this helps you. Don't forget, your x and y's are traveling in pairs. So when you find your x-intercept, that's when your y is 0. And if you're finding your y-intercept, that's when x is 0. And that's why I wrote that down. Okay, over and over again, it's like it kind of sticks in the head that these are pairs, right? So y-intercept is when x is 0, and x-intercept is when y is 0. Until next time, bye.